The vacuum hummed softly as I moved it across the living room carpet, lost in the rhythm of cleaning. The sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over our cozy home. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, one of those rare days where we both had no plans, just time to relax and enjoy each other's company. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I turned off the vacuum and made my way to the door, wondering who could be visiting unannounced. As I opened it, I was greeted by a delivery man holding a stunning bouquet of flowers. The array of vibrant colors and the delicate arrangement took me by surprise. "Good afternoon," the delivery man said with a cheerful smile. "I have a delivery for Karen." "Oh, thank you," I replied, taking the bouquet from him. The flowers were fresh, their fragrance filling the air immediately. A white card nestled among the blooms caught my eye. It read, "From your secret admirer." A mixture of curiosity and unease washed over me. "Have a good day," the delivery man added before turning to leave. "Thanks, you too," I mumbled, closing the door behind me. I stood there for a moment, staring at the bouquet. My mind raced with possibilities. Who could have sent these? And why didn't they include their name? Karen was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared lunch. I walked in, holding the bouquet out in front of me like an offering. "Hey, Karen, look what just arrived." She turned, her eyes widening in surprise and delight. "Oh my goodness, they're beautiful. Who are they from?" I handed her the card, watching her expression closely. She read it, her brow furrowing slightly. "From your secret admirer," she read aloud, then looked up at me with a puzzled smile. "Did you send these?" I shook my head. "No, I didn't. I thought they might be from, one of your friends or something." She laughed, a light, airy sound that usually brought a smile to my face. But today, it didn't. "I don't think any of my friends would send me flowers without signing their name. It's a bit mysterious, isn't it?" "Yeah, it is," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. But inside, a seed of doubt was planted. Who could this secret admirer be? And what did they want with my wife? Karen placed the bouquet in a vase, arranging the flowers with care. "They're gorgeous. Whoever sent them has great taste." I watched her, a knot forming in my stomach. "Yeah, they do." I forced a smile, but my mind was elsewhere, already beginning to turn over the implications of this unexpected gift. As we sat down for lunch, the flowers took center stage on the dining table, their vibrant presence impossible to ignore. We chatted about mundane things, the usual topics of conversation, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that card. "Do you have any idea who might have sent them?" I asked casually, trying to sound nonchalant. Karen shook her head, her eyes on the flowers. "No, I really don't. Maybe it's just a harmless gesture, Some random act of kindness." "Maybe." I agreed, though I wasn't convinced. The idea of a secret admirer seemed far from harmless. It was a disruption, a crack in the facade of our seemingly perfect life, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just the beginning. As the day wore on, I found myself glancing at the bouquet repeatedly, each look fueling my suspicions. Karen seemed genuinely oblivious, enjoying the flowers and the mystery they brought. But for me, they were a symbol of something else, something unsettling that lurked beneath the surface of our everyday life. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't help but ask one more question. "Karen, are you sure there's no one who might have sent those flowers? No one you've been talking to or anything?" She turned to face me, her expression serious. "Chris, I promise you, I have no idea who sent them. You have nothing to worry about." I nodded, wanting to believe her. But as I closed my eyes, the image of the bouquet lingered in my mind, a vivid reminder that sometimes, even in the most secure relationships, shadows can appear out of nowhere, casting doubt where there once was none. The rest of the afternoon, the bouquet sat on our dining table like a centerpiece of curiosity, its vibrant petals and fresh fragrance a stark contrast to the gnawing unease in my chest. Every time I passed by, I couldn't help but glance at it, my mind replaying Karen's reaction over and over. She had seemed flustered when she read the card, her eyes darting away from mine. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but after years of marriage, I knew her well enough to pick up on the smallest tells. She had always been an open book to me, or so I had thought. As evening settled in, Karen was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The clatter of pots and pans was usually a comforting sound, but today it did little to ease my restless thoughts. I decided to join her, hoping to bridge the growing distance with casual conversation. "Need any help?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Karen looked up, a hint of surprise in her eyes. "Sure, you can chop the vegetables," she said, handing me a knife and a cutting board. I started slicing the carrots, my mind still spinning with questions. "So, any thoughts on the flowers?" I asked, attempting to sound casual. She shrugged, focusing on the stove. "Not really. It's probably just a harmless gesture, like I said earlier. Maybe a thank you from someone I helped at work." "Maybe," I replied, though her explanation felt weak. Karen worked as a nurse, and while it wasn't unusual for patients to show their appreciation, a card from a secret admirer seemed out of place. As we continued preparing dinner, the conversation drifted to other topics: work, weekend plans, a possible vacation we had been discussing. But my mind kept circling back to the flowers. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me. After dinner, we settled on the couch to watch a movie. Karen leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. Normally, this closeness would have put me at ease, but tonight it felt like a facade. My thoughts were a tangled mess of suspicion and guilt. Was I overreacting? Reading too much into an innocent gesture? Or was there something more sinister at play? "Chris, you seem quiet tonight," Karen said, her voice soft and concerned. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Yeah, I guess I'm just tired. It's been a long day." She lifted her head to look at me, her eyes searching mine. "Are you sure that's all? You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" I forced a smile, nodding. "I know, Karen. It's just been one of those days." She seemed to accept my answer, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The movie continued, but I barely paid attention. My mind was too busy sifting through every interaction, every moment that might explain the bouquet. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I found myself staring at the ceiling, the darkness amplifying my thoughts. Karen's steady breathing indicated she was already asleep, but I remained wide awake. The image of her reaction to the flowers replayed in my mind like a broken record. What if there was someone else? The thought was like a dagger, twisting in my gut. I tried to recall any other signs, any other moments that might suggest infidelity, but nothing came to mind. Our life together had been happy, filled with love and trust. But now, doubt had crept in, poisoning every memory. "Karen," I whispered, unsure if I wanted her to hear me. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. I sighed, feeling the weight of my suspicions pressing down on me. This wasn't like me. I had always trusted Karen implicitly, but the arrival of those flowers had planted a seed of doubt, one that was growing rapidly, threatening to overshadow everything else. The next morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, I resolved to push my doubts aside. I would give Karen the benefit of the doubt, trust in the foundation we had built together. But deep down, I knew that seed had already taken root, and it would take more than blind faith to uproot it. As we sat down for breakfast, the bouquet still sat on the table, its presence a silent reminder of my unease. I glanced at Karen, who seemed cheerful and oblivious to my inner turmoil. "Do you have any plans for today?" I asked, trying to engage in normal conversation. "Just work, as usual," she replied, sipping her coffee. "And you?" "Same here. Maybe we can do something special this weekend, just the two of us." She smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "That sounds perfect. I'd love that." I returned her smile, but inside, the doubt lingered. As I left for work, I took one last look at the bouquet, its vibrant colors now seeming more like a harbinger of something I wasn't ready to face. Walking out the door, I couldn't help but wonder, how long could I keep pretending everything was fine? How long before the seeds of doubt grew into a garden of suspicion, too big to ignore? The company Christmas party was in full swing, the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and festive music filling the air. The ballroom was adorned with twinkling lights and garlands, casting a warm golden glow over the room. Employees mingled, their faces flushed with holiday cheer and the effects of a well-stocked bar. I stood near the entrance, a glass of punch in my hand, scanning the room for Karen. She was easy to spot, her red dress standing out against the sea of darker colors. She was talking animatedly with a group of colleagues, her laughter ringing out above the noise. I couldn't help but smile. She looked radiant, completely in her element. But my smile faded when I noticed Roland Street-Claire from the accounting department, standing a little too close to her. His hand rested casually on her shoulder, and she didn't seem to mind. A knot tightened in my stomach, and I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay calm. "Hey, Chris, enjoying the party?" My colleague Mark slapped me on the back, nearly making me spill my drink. "Yeah, it's great," I replied, forcing a smile. "Lots of fun." Mark followed my gaze and chuckled. "Looks like your wife is the life of the party. She's really something, isn't she?" I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. The seed of doubt, planted by the mysterious bouquet, had been growing steadily, and seeing Karen with Roland only made it worse. "Excuse me," I said to Mark, making my way across the room toward Karen and Roland. As I approached, I tried to appear casual, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "Hey, everyone," I said, slipping an arm around Karen's waist. She turned to me, her face lighting up with a smile. "Chris, have you met Roland?" she asked, gesturing to the man standing beside her. "Yes, we've met," I replied, extending a hand. Roland took it, his grip firm, but not overly so. "Nice to see you again, Chris," Roland said with a polite smile. "Karen was just telling us about your plans for the holidays." "Yeah, we're planning a quiet Christmas at home," I said, glancing at Karen. She looked slightly flustered, a small detail that didn't escape me. Roland nodded. "That sounds wonderful. Family time is the best time." I forced a smile, but inside, my thoughts were racing. Was I imagining things, or was there something more to Roland's interest in Karen? The way he looked at her, the casual touches, it all seemed too familiar. "Karen, would you like to dance?" I asked, wanting to put some distance between her and Roland. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Of course." We made our way to the dance floor, and I pulled her close as a slow song began to play. For a few moments, I let myself enjoy the feel of her in my arms, the familiar rhythm of her heartbeat against my chest. But the doubt wouldn't let me be. "Chris, is everything okay?" Karen asked softly, looking up at me with concern. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just noticing how popular you are tonight." She laughed lightly. "It's a party, Chris. Everyone's just having a good time." "Yeah, I know," I said, my eyes drifting back to Roland, who was now talking with another group of colleagues, but occasionally glancing our way. "It's just, I've noticed you and Roland seem pretty friendly." Karen stiffened slightly in my arms. "We work together, Chris. Of course we're friendly. What's this about?" I took a deep breath, trying to choose my words carefully. "I don't know. Maybe it's nothing. It's just, ever since those flowers showed up, I've been feeling a little." "A little what?" She pressed gently. "A little uneasy," I admitted, meeting her gaze. "I know it's probably nothing, but it's been on my mind." Karen sighed, her expression softening. "Chris, I promise you, there's nothing going on. The flowers were a surprise to me too, but it doesn't mean anything. You have to trust me." "I do trust you," I said quickly, though even I could hear the doubt in my voice. "It's just, Seeing you with Roland, it made me wonder. Karen's eyes softened with understanding. Chris, there's nothing to worry about. Roland is just a colleague. You're the one I love, and that's not going to change. I wanted to believe her, to let her words soothe the turmoil inside me. But the seed of doubt had taken root, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As we danced, I held her a little tighter, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, even as the shadows of suspicion continued to grow. The drive home from the Christmas party was filled with a strained silence, the festive lights along the streets contrasting sharply with the tension inside the car. Karen stared out the window, her expression unreadable, while I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. As soon as we walked through the front door, I knew I couldn't hold back any longer. The unease had grown too strong, the doubts too persistent. I needed answers. Karen, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to talk. She sighed, setting her purse down on the kitchen counter. About what, Chris? About Roland, I said, turning to face her. And about those flowers. Karen rubbed her temples, looking exhausted. Chris, I told you already. Roland is just a colleague, and the flowers were probably from a grateful patient. There's nothing more to it. But it doesn't make sense, I pressed, taking a step closer. A secret admirer. That's not something a patient would write. And the way you two were at the party tonight, it just didn't feel right. She looked at me, her eyes filled with frustration. So what are you saying? That I'm having an affair? I don't know, I admitted, the words hanging heavily between us. But something isn't adding up, and your answers aren't helping. Karen shook her head, her expression a mix of anger and hurt. Chris, this is ridiculous. I love you. I've never given you any reason to doubt that. Then why do I feel like you're hiding something? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Why can't you just be honest with me? She took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping. I am being honest. There's nothing going on with Roland. He's just a colleague who's going through a rough time, and I've been trying to help him out. That's all. Her words were reasonable, but the doubt in my mind wouldn't be so easily dispelled. I needed more than reassurances. I needed proof. Okay, I said, trying to sound conciliatory. I want to believe you, Karen, but you have to understand how this looks from my perspective. She crossed her arms, her eyes hardening. And what are you planning to do about it? Follow me around? Spy on me? No, I said quickly, though the idea had crossed my mind. I need to be sure. I need to know that I'm not imagining things. Karen sighed deeply, her anger seeming to drain away. Chris, I can't live like this, with you doubting my every move. We need to trust each other, or this marriage won't work. I know, I replied, feeling a pang of guilt. And I want to trust you. But right now, I need some reassurance. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. Fine. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that there's nothing going on. But you have to promise me that once you're satisfied, you'll let this go. I promise, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I could keep that promise. The next few days passed in a tense blur. Karen went out of her way to include me in her plans, making sure I knew where she was and who she was with at all times. She even invited me to join her for lunch at work, something we rarely did. But despite her efforts, the seed of doubt continued to grow. I found myself scrutinizing every interaction, every conversation, searching for signs that she was being untruthful. It was exhausting, and it was taking a toll on both of us. One evening, after a particularly long and silent dinner, I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. If Karen wouldn't, or couldn't, give me the answers I needed, I would find them myself. After she went to bed, I sat down at my computer and began my research. I looked up Roland St. Clair, finding out everything I could about him. His social media profiles were mostly private, but I managed to gather some basic information. His work history, his interests, his friends. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. I needed to know more about his relationship with Karen, and the only way to do that was to see for myself. The next day, I called in sick to work, waiting until Karen had left for the hospital. Then I drove to her workplace and parked a few blocks away, keeping a low profile. It felt wrong, like I was betraying her trust, but my need for answers overrode my guilt. From my vantage point, I could see the main entrance to the hospital. I waited for what felt like hours, watching as employees and visitors came and went. Just when I was beginning to think my efforts were in vain, I saw Roland exit the building. He looked around, almost as if he was checking to see if he was being watched, then headed down the street. I started my car and followed at a safe distance, my heart pounding. Roland walked for a few blocks before entering a small cafe. I parked nearby and watched through the window as he sat down at a table. Moments later, Karen walked in and joined him. My heart sank as I watched them talk, their heads close together. They seemed deep in conversation, and though I couldn't hear what they were saying, the familiarity between them was unmistakable. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures, my hands shaking. It felt like I was crossing a line, but I needed evidence, proof that my suspicions weren't just in my head. When Karen finally left the cafe, I waited a few minutes before heading home. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: anger, hurt, betrayal. But beneath it all was a grim determination. When Karen came home that evening, I knew I had to confront her again, this time with the evidence I had gathered. "Karen, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. She looked at me, her expression wary. "What is it now, Chris?" "I saw you with Roland today," I said, holding up my phone to show her the pictures. "I followed you to the cafe." Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in anger. "You followed me? How could you do that?" "I needed to know the truth," I replied, my voice rising. "And now I do. So tell me, Karen, what's really going on between you and Roland?" She stared at me for a long moment, then sighed, the fight draining out of her. "Okay, Chris, you want the truth. Here it is." She sat down, and I braced myself for whatever was coming next. The seed of doubt had grown into something much larger, and now it was time to confront it head-on. The idea gnawed at me for days, and each moment that passed felt like another grain of sand slipping through an hourglass. My trust in Karen was eroding rapidly, and I knew I needed concrete evidence to either confirm or dispel my fears. On a chilly Saturday morning, I made my way to a small electronics store on the outskirts of town. The windows were adorned with posters of the latest gadgets and security devices, and a bell chimed softly as I pushed the door open. A middle-aged man with thinning hair and glasses greeted me with a polite nod from behind the counter. "Good morning. Can I help you with something?" I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I'm looking for a clock radio with a hidden camera, something discreet but reliable." The man's eyebrows raised slightly, but he didn't ask questions. "Follow me," he said, leading me to a display of various surveillance devices. "We have a few models that might suit your needs." After a brief explanation of the different features, I settled on a model that seemed perfect for my purposes. It had a high-resolution camera hidden behind the clock face, capable of recording both video and audio. The man rang up the purchase, and I left the store with a knot in my stomach. Back home, I unpacked the device on the kitchen table, staring at it as if it were some malevolent artifact. Setting it up in our bedroom felt like a profound betrayal, yet the need for truth outweighed my guilt. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I heard Karen's voice from downstairs. She was on the phone, laughing softly. I paused for a moment, listening to the sound of her laughter, a sound that had once brought me joy but now only deepened my suspicion. Once in the bedroom, I carefully positioned the clock radio on the nightstand, making sure it had a clear view of the bed and the surrounding area. Every click of the setup felt like another nail in the coffin of my trust, sealing away the remnants of the life Karen and I had built together. I connected the device to our home Wi-Fi and installed the accompanying software on my laptop. The interface was user-friendly, allowing me to monitor the live feed and set up motion-activated recording. As I finalized the setup, I heard Karen coming up the stairs. Quickly, I closed the laptop and placed it under the bed. Karen entered the room, her eyes curious. "What are you doing up here?" she asked, a smile playing on her lips. "Just tidying up a bit," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Thought it might be a good time to rearrange things a little." She looked around, noting the new clock radio. "Nice addition. I don't remember us buying that." I forced a smile. "I picked it up today. Thought it would be nice to have an updated alarm clock." Karen nodded, her suspicions seemingly eased. "Well, I like it. Thanks, Chris." She leaned in and kissed me on the cheek, and for a brief moment I felt a pang of remorse. But I pushed it aside, reminding myself of the bigger picture. I needed to know the truth. Days turned into a routine of silent observation. Each evening, after Karen had fallen asleep, I would retrieve the laptop and review the footage. Most of it was mundane. Karen reading, getting ready for bed, or talking on the phone. There was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing to justify my fears. One evening, as I was about to turn off the laptop, a notification popped up. "Motion detected." My heart raced as I clicked on the file. The footage showed Karen sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone in hand. She seemed agitated, glancing toward the door as if expecting someone. I leaned closer, watching as she dialed a number, and began speaking in hushed tones. The camera's audio picked up snippets of the conversation. "No, Roland, I can't meet you tomorrow." "Yes, I understand. But Chris is getting suspicious. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." My blood ran cold. The confirmation I had dreaded was now undeniable. Karen was hiding something, and Roland was involved. My suspicions were no longer baseless paranoia. They were a grim reality. The next morning, I confronted Karen again, my anger barely contained. "Karen, we need to talk. Now." She looked at me, her eyes wide with concern. "Chris, what's wrong?" "I know you've been talking to Roland," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of hurt and rage. "I heard you on the phone last night." Her face paled, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Why, Karen? Why are you doing this?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "Chris, it's not what you think. Roland, he's been going through a lot, and I've been trying to help him. That's all." "Helping him?" I scoffed. "By lying to me. By sneaking around behind my back." She reached out, but I stepped away. "Chris, please, let me explain." I shook my head, the weight of betrayal crashing down on me. "I don't know if I can believe anything you say anymore, Karen." Her tears fell freely now, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The trust between us had been shattered, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. The seeds of doubt had grown into a chasm, and I feared there was no way to bridge it. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew that our lives had changed irrevocably. The clock radio, with its hidden camera, ticked softly beside me, a constant reminder of the lengths I had gone to uncover the truth. And now that I had it, I wasn't sure what to do with it. With a mixture of dread and anticipation, I sat down at my desk late that night, the soft glow of the laptop screen illuminating the room. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the surveillance software and navigated to the most recent recordings. Each click felt like a hammer blow to my heart, yet I couldn't stop myself. I needed to know. The footage began playing, and there she was, Karen, my beautiful wife, moving around our bedroom with an ease and grace that I had always admired. She looked so normal, so innocent, and for a fleeting moment, I hoped that this would be just another mundane recording. But then, the scene changed. Karen was no longer alone. Roland was there, standing too close, his body language betraying an intimacy that should not have existed. My heart sank as I watched them. Every touch, every look confirming my worst fears. Karen laughed softly at something Roland said, her eyes sparkling in a way that I hadn't seen in months. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his face, and he responded by placing a hand on her arm, his thumb caressing her skin. I paused the video, unable to watch any further. My breath came in shallow gasps, the room spinning around me. This was the proof I had dreaded finding, the confirmation that my marriage was crumbling before my very eyes. For a moment, I considered deleting the footage, pretending that none of this had ever happened, but I knew that I couldn't turn back now. I needed to see it all, to understand the extent of their betrayal. I pressed play again, forcing myself to watch as the scene unfolded. Karen and Roland sat on the edge of the bed, their conversation too quiet for the camera to capture clearly, but their body language spoke volumes. They were comfortable with each other, too comfortable for just colleagues. Roland leaned in, whispering something in Karen's ear. She smiled, a blush spreading across her cheeks, and then she kissed him. It was a gentle kiss at first, but it quickly deepened, their hands exploring each other with a familiarity that tore at my soul. "Karen," Roland murmured, his voice barely audible. "Are you sure about this? What if Chris finds out?" Karen pulled back slightly, her expression conflicted. "I don't know, Roland. I hate lying to him. But what?" Roland pressed, his hand resting on her thigh. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "But I can't stop myself. Being with you, it feels right in a way I can't explain." My heart shattered at her words, each one a dagger plunging deeper into my chest. I wanted to scream, to rage, to confront them both and demand answers. But instead, I sat there, paralyzed by the enormity of their betrayal. The recording continued, each moment more painful than the last. They spoke of their feelings, their fears, their plans. Roland wanted Karen to leave me, to start a new life with him. Karen was hesitant, torn between her loyalty to me and her feelings for Roland. As the video ended, I closed the laptop, my mind racing. The evidence was irrefutable. Karen was having an affair, and my marriage was hanging by a thread. I needed to confront her, but I knew that this time, it had to be different. I couldn't just accuse her and hope for the best. I needed a plan, a way to make her understand the gravity of her actions and the pain she had caused. The next morning, I woke early, my thoughts still consumed by the footage. Karen was already in the kitchen, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper. She looked up as I entered, a smile on her face. "Morning, Chris. You're up early." I forced a smile, my heart aching at the sight of her. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." She frowned, concern clouding her eyes. "Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Karen, we need to talk." She set down her coffee, her expression wary. "About what?" "About us," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "And about Roland." Her face paled, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "Chris, Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "I've seen the footage, Karen. I know everything." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she covered her mouth with her hand, stifling a sob. "Chris, I'm so sorry." "Sorry," I echoed, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You're sorry for lying to me, for betraying our marriage, for sneaking around with Roland behind my back." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want this to happen, Chris. I didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did," I said quietly, the weight of her betrayal crushing me. "You hurt me more than you can ever imagine." She reached out, but I stepped back, the distance between us growing with each passing second. "Chris, please." I shook my head, unable to bear the sight of her tears. "I need some time, Karen. Time to figure out what comes next." Without another word, I turned and left the room, the sound of her sobs echoing in my ears. As I walked away, I knew that my life would never be the same again. The trust that had once bound us was gone, replaced by a chasm of doubt and betrayal. And as much as I wanted to believe that we could find a way back to each other, Deep down, I feared that the damage was already done. The days that followed my confrontation with Karen were a blur of suspicion and heartache. The betrayal I had witnessed on the surveillance footage haunted me, fueling an obsession to gather more evidence. I needed to be certain, to piece together the full extent of Karen's infidelity. Only then could I decide what to do next. Each morning, I woke up with a heavy heart, the weight of doubt pressing down on me. I found myself scrutinizing every aspect of Karen's behavior, looking for any signs that might confirm my worst fears. I took note of her movements, her phone calls, and her messages, all the while trying to maintain an outward facade of normalcy. One evening, as Karen showered, I seized the opportunity to check her phone. My hands trembled slightly as I navigated through her messages, scanning for anything suspicious. I felt a pang of guilt invading her privacy, but I pushed it aside, driven by the need for answers. Amid the mundane texts to friends and colleagues, I found a string of messages from Roland. My heart pounded as I read through their exchanges, each one more damning than the last. Roland, can't stop thinking about last night. When can we meet again? Karen, soon. I miss you. Chris is working late tomorrow. We can meet then. Roland, perfect. I'll come over at 8. Love you. Karen, love you too. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. This was more than just a fling. It was a full-blown affair. They spoke of love, of plans to be together, and of secret meetings. Every message was a knife twisting in my gut, confirming the betrayal I had hoped wasn't real. Karen's voice, calling from the bathroom, startled me. Chris, can you grab me a towel? I quickly locked her phone and placed it back where I had found it, composing myself before responding. Sure thing, just a second. I handed her the towel, forcing a smile as she emerged from the bathroom. She looked so beautiful, so innocent, and for a moment I almost believed everything could go back to the way it was. But the evidence was clear, and my trust in her was shattered. As she dried off, I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual. So, any plans for tomorrow evening? She hesitated, her eyes flicking towards the door. Just a quiet night at home. Why? I might be working late, I said, watching her closely. Thought I'd let you know. Her smile faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. Okay, thanks for telling me. The next day, I left for work as usual but returned home early, parking down the street and sneaking into the house. I positioned myself where I could see the front door without being seen. My heart raced with a mix of anticipation and dread as I waited. At exactly 8 p.m., Roland's car pulled up. I watched as he knocked on the door, and Karen let him in, her face lighting up with a smile. I waited a few minutes before quietly slipping inside, moving stealthily towards the living room. There they were, seated on the couch, their hands entwined. Roland leaned in to kiss her, and she responded eagerly, all the while murmuring words of love and longing. I captured the moment on my phone, my hands shaking but steady enough to get clear footage. As I watched them, a wave of anger and sorrow washed over me. This was the proof I needed, the undeniable evidence of their affair, but it brought me no comfort, only a deep, aching pain. Later that night, after Roland had left and Karen had gone to bed, I sat in my office reviewing the footage. Every look, every touch was etched into my mind, fueling my resolve. I knew that I couldn't confront Karen without solid proof, without a clear plan for what came next. The next morning, I woke early and headed to the local electronics store. I purchased a small, discreet voice recorder, intending to capture their conversations. Each step I took in gathering evidence felt like another betrayal, another nail in the coffin of our marriage, but I couldn't stop myself. Over the next few days, I planted the recorder in various places: Karen's car, her purse, and the living room. I listened to their conversations, piecing together the full extent of their relationship. They spoke of secret meetings, plans for the future, and their fears of being discovered. Every word was a dagger to my heart, confirming that my marriage was over. One evening, As Karen prepared dinner, I decided to broach the subject indirectly. "So, how's work been lately? You seem busier than usual." She glanced at me, her expression guarded. "It's been fine. Just the usual end-of-year rush." "And Roland? How's he doing?" She froze for a moment, then forced a smile. "He's fine too. Why do you ask?" "Just curious," I replied, keeping my tone light. "You two seem to be spending a lot of time together." Karen's smile faltered, and she turned back to the stove. "We're just colleagues, Chris. Nothing more." I nodded, but inside, I was seething. The lies were piling up, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I confronted her with the truth. That night, after Karen had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the evidence I had gathered. The recordings, the messages, the surveillance footage. It all painted a clear picture of her betrayal. My heart ached with the weight of it all, but I knew that I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. As I stared at the evidence, I made a decision. It was time to confront Karen, to lay everything out and demand answers. Our marriage was at a crossroads, and only the truth could set me free. The weight of the evidence I had gathered was crushing. Every night, I sat alone in the dark, replaying the recordings and rereading the messages, each one a painful reminder of Karen's betrayal. I knew I couldn't endure it any longer. I had to confront her, to lay bare the truth and demand answers. One evening after dinner, I decided it was time. Karen was in the living room, reading a book, her face serene and unaware of the storm about to hit. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come, and walked in, holding the folder containing all the damning evidence. "Karen," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk." She looked up, a hint of concern crossing her features. "What's wrong, Chris?" I handed her the folder. "You tell me." Her hand shook as she opened it, her eyes widening as she saw the photos, the transcripts, and the USB drive with the videos. Her face paled, and she looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Chris, I can explain." "No," I said, my voice hardening. "No more lies, Karen. I've seen the videos. I've read the messages. Just tell me the truth." She broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I never meant for this to happen. It just did." "How long?" I asked, my voice a mixture of anger and pain. "How long has this been going on?" "A few months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started at the office party. I didn't mean to hurt you." "Didn't mean to hurt me," I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back. How could you do this to us, to our marriage?" She looked down, her tears falling onto the folder. "I was unhappy, Chris. I felt like we were drifting apart. And Roland, he made me feel alive again. And you didn't think to talk to me about it," I demanded. "You just decided to throw everything away for a fling." "It wasn't just a fling," she said softly. I thought I loved him." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer, shattering my world. I felt a rush of anger and betrayal, but beneath it all, there was a deep aching sorrow. "So what now?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Where do we go from here?" Karen looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I don't know, Chris. I don't know what to do. I need time to think," I said, turning away from her. "I can't be around you right now." "Please, Chris," she pleaded, reaching out to me. "We can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Karen. I don't know if I even want to try." I walked out of the living room, leaving her sobbing on the couch. My heart felt like it was being ripped apart, but I knew I needed space to process everything. The betrayal had shattered my world, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be put back together. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my mind raced with thoughts of our past, our love, and the future that now seemed so uncertain. The woman I had adored had betrayed me, and I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. The next morning, I left the house before Karen woke up, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere. I drove endlessly for hours, trying to clear my mind, but the pain and anger followed me everywhere. I pulled over to the side of the road, burying my face in my hands. The tears came then, a flood of emotion that I couldn't hold back. My world had been turned upside down, and I didn't know how to make sense of it all. When I finally returned home, Karen was waiting for me. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she looked like she hadn't slept at all. "Chris," she said softly, "we need to talk." I nodded, feeling the weight of the conversation ahead. "Yeah, we do." We sat down at the kitchen table, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. Finally, I broke the silence. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Karen," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know if I want to." "I understand," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "But please, give us a chance to try. I'll do anything to make this right." Her words hung in the air, and I felt a flicker of hope, mingled with the deep pain of betrayal. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but perhaps, just maybe, we could find a way through the wreckage of our shattered trust. As we sat there, facing the uncertain future together, I realized that this was just the beginning of our journey. The truth had been confronted, but the healing was far from over. The next day, I forced myself to face the reality of our situation. I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer, a cold pit forming in my stomach as I drove to his office. The familiar streets seemed alien to me now, devoid of the warmth and love I once associated with them. As I sat in the lawyer's office, the air heavy with the weight of our impending divorce, I couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. How had we gone from being madly in love to sitting in a sterile office, discussing the legal consequences of Karen's infidelity? The lawyer, a stern-faced man with a no-nonsense demeanor, wasted no time getting down to business. He outlined the terms of the divorce, focusing on the financial implications of Karen's betrayal. As the guilty party in the marriage, he explained, Karen will be entitled to significantly less in the divorce settlement. The court will take her infidelity into account when dividing assets and determining spousal support. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, the reality of our situation sinking in with each passing moment. The life we had built together, the dreams we had shared, were now crumbling around us, reduced to cold, hard numbers on a legal document. "I know this is difficult," the lawyer said, his voice tinged with sympathy, "but it's important to be prepared for what lies ahead. Divorce is never easy, but with the right legal representation, you can protect your interests and move forward with your life." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I understand." As we continued to discuss the terms of the divorce, a sense of numbness settled over me. The cold, legal language felt surreal, a stark contrast to the warmth and love I once felt for Karen. It was as if I were watching our lives unravel from a distance, disconnected from the pain and heartache that threatened to consume me. Eventually, the meeting came to an end, and I left the lawyer's office with a heavy heart. The road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with legal battles and emotional turmoil. But I knew that I had to do what was necessary to protect myself and move forward with my life. As I drove home, the weight of our impending divorce pressed down on me like a leaden blanket. The life I had once known was slipping through my fingers, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. All I could do was steel myself for the challenges that lay ahead and cling to the hope that someday I would find peace and happiness once again. Closing our joint accounts was a painful but necessary step in the process of untangling our lives. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of paperwork, each document a reminder of the life we had shared together. With a heavy heart, I filled out the forms, my hand trembling slightly as I signed my name. Every stroke of the pen felt like a nail in the coffin of our marriage, sealing our fate with each decisive action. As I closed the final account, a sense of finality washed over me. It was done. Our financial ties were severed, and I was free to move forward with my life. But even as a wave of liberation washed over me, I couldn't shake the profound sadness that accompanied it. Karen's voice echoed in my mind, her laughter and love a distant memory. How had it come to this? How had our once perfect marriage crumbled so completely? I pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. Opening new accounts in my name felt like a fresh start, a chance to rebuild my life from the ashes of our broken marriage. But even as I took each step towards independence, a part of me mourned the loss of what we had once shared, the dreams we had built together, the plans we had made for the future. They all seemed like distant fantasies now, shattered by the harsh reality of our present circumstances. As I finished the last of the paperwork, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. Closing our joint accounts was more than just a financial transaction. It was a symbolic gesture, a final farewell to the life we had once known. I sat back in my chair, the weight of our divorce pressing down on me like a heavy burden. But amidst the pain and heartache, there was a glimmer of hope, a belief that perhaps in time I could find happiness once again. The sound of the phone ringing broke through my thoughts, jolting me back to reality. I answered it with a weary sigh, steeling myself for whatever news awaited me on the other end of the line. "Chris?" It was Karen's voice, tentative and uncertain. I just wanted to say. But I couldn't bear to hear her words, not now. Not when my heart was still raw with pain and anger. "Karen," I interrupted, my voice firm, but tinged with sadness. "I think it's best if we don't talk right now. I need some time to process everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, filled with unspoken regret and longing. "I understand," she finally whispered. "Take care of yourself, Chris." With a heavy heart, I hung up the phone, the weight of our conversation lingering in the air like a ghost. Closing our joint accounts was just the beginning of the end, a small step towards the finality of our divorce. But amidst the pain and heartache, there was a glimmer of hope, a belief that perhaps in time we could both find peace and happiness once again. The decision to pack up Karen's belongings was one of the hardest I'd ever made. As I sifted through our shared possessions, each item felt like a stab to the heart, a painful reminder of the life we once shared. I carefully folded her clothes, her scent still lingering on the fabric, and placed them in boxes, trying to ignore the memories that threatened to overwhelm me. Our wedding album sat on the coffee table, its pages filled with smiles and laughter, a stark contrast to the sadness that now filled the room. With each item I packed away, I felt a piece of my heart breaking. But amidst the pain and sorrow, there was a sense of determination, a recognition that this was necessary for both of us to move forward with our lives. When Karen returned home from work, the sight of the packed boxes seemed to catch her off guard. She stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "What's going on, Chris?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation that was about to come. "I've packed your things," I said, my voice steady but tinged with sadness. "You'll be staying at your mother's house for the time being." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken emotion. Karen's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch one of the boxes. "Chris, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I don't want to leave. I want to stay here with you." I shook my head, unable to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry, Karen, but it's for the best. We both need some space to figure things out." She collapsed onto the couch, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Please don't do this," she begged. "I love you, Chris. I'll do anything to make this right." But her words fell on deaf ears. I couldn't bear to see her pain, but I knew that staying here would only prolong the inevitable. We needed time apart to heal, to find ourselves again after the devastation of our failed marriage. With a heavy heart, I gathered up the last of her belongings and placed them by the door. "I'll call your mother," I said softly. "She'll come to pick you up." Karen nodded, her face a mask of sorrow and resignation. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her tears. As I watched her leave, the weight of our separation settled over me like a dark cloud. Moving out was just another painful chapter in our story, a necessary step towards closure and healing. But amidst the sorrow and heartache, there was a glimmer of hope, a belief that perhaps in time we could both find peace and happiness once again. The atmosphere in the room was tense as Karen and I faced each other, the weight of our failed marriage hanging heavy in the air. She tried to speak, to explain and apologize, but I couldn't bring myself to listen. My mind was made up, my heart hardened against her pleas. "Chris, please," she begged, her voice trembling with emotion. "I know I've made mistakes, but I love you. I don't want to lose you." Her words pierced through the walls I had built around my heart, stirring up a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to believe that we could somehow salvage what was left of our shattered relationship. But another part, the part that had been hurt and betrayed, refused to let go of the pain and anger that consumed me. "I'm sorry, Karen," I said, my voice cold and distant. "But it's too late for apologies. We both know that our marriage is beyond repair." Tears welled up in her eyes, her hands trembling as she reached out to me. "Please, Chris," she pleaded. "Give me another chance. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." But I shook my head, unable to meet her gaze. "I can't," I whispered. "I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not. We need to face the truth, Karen. Our marriage is over." With a heavy heart, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the divorce papers, the sight of them sending a shiver down my spine. They represented the finality of our relationship, the end of a chapter in our lives that I had once believed would last forever. I handed the papers to Karen, my hand shaking as I watched her take them. She looked down at them, her hands trembling as she read the words printed on the page. A single tear rolled down her cheek, her face a mask of sorrow and regret. "I never wanted it to end like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her tears. "Neither did I wanted to say. But the words caught in my throat, choked by the weight of our shared pain and disappointment. Slowly, Karen picked up the pen, her hand trembling as she signed her name on the dotted line. With each stroke of the pen, our marriage was officially ending, the final nail in the coffin of our shattered dreams. As she handed the papers back to me, our fingers brushed against each other, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver down my spine. In that moment, I felt a pang of regret, a longing for the love we had once shared. But it was too late for regrets now. Our marriage was over, and there was nothing left to do but say goodbye. With a heavy heart, I gathered up the papers and placed them back in my briefcase. The final confrontation was over, our fate sealed with the stroke of a pen. As I walked out of the room, leaving Karen behind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness, a void where our love had once thrived. But amidst the pain and sorrow, there was a glimmer of hope, a belief that perhaps, in time, we could both find peace and happiness once again. Living alone was an adjustment I hadn't fully prepared for. The once bustling house now echoed with silence, each creak of the floorboards a painful reminder of the life I had lost. But amidst the loneliness, there was a sense of freedom, a chance to rediscover myself and rebuild my life from the ashes of my broken marriage. I threw myself into my work, burying myself in endless tasks and projects in an attempt to distract myself from the pain of my failed relationship. The familiar routine of the office provided a welcome respite from the turmoil of my personal life, offering a sense of purpose and direction in the midst of chaos. But even as I threw myself into my work, the memories of Karen lingered in the corners of my mind, haunting me like ghosts from the past. Her laughter echoed through the empty rooms, her scent lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the love we had once shared. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself grappling with conflicting emotions, grief and anger, longing and regret. But amidst the turmoil, there was a glimmer of hope, a belief that perhaps, in time, I could find peace and happiness once again. One evening, as I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, lost in thought, the sound of the phone ringing broke through the silence. I answered it with a sense of trepidation, unsure of what news awaited me on the other end of the line. "Chris." It was Grace, my longtime friend and confidant. "I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up?" Her voice was filled with genuine concern, a welcome reminder that I wasn't alone in my struggles. I'm managing," I replied, my voice weary but resolute. "It's been tough, but I'm taking it one day at a time." Grace was silent for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. "Listen, Chris," she said finally, her tone gentle but firm. "I know this isn't easy, but you can't keep shutting yourself off from the world. You need to start living again, to embrace the future instead of dwelling on the past." Her words struck a chord deep within me, a reminder that life was too short to waste on regrets and what-ifs. "You're right, Grace," I said, a sense of determination settling over me. "It's time for a new beginning." And with those words, I made a silent vow to myself to let go of the pain and heartache of the past, and to embrace whatever the future held in store. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew that with the support of friends like Grace, I could find the strength to start anew. As the months passed, I slowly began to emerge from the shadow of my failed marriage. The pain that had once consumed me began to dull, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and direction. I threw myself into new hobbies and interests, seeking solace in the simple pleasures of life. One afternoon, I found myself wandering through the bustling streets of the city, the sounds and sights of the world around me, a welcome distraction from the turmoil of my past. The sun was shining overhead, casting a warm glow over the bustling crowds, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I ran into an old friend, Sarah, by chance as I strolled through the park. Her face lit up with genuine joy as she spotted me, and we fell into an easy conversation, reminiscing about old times and catching up on each other's lives. "It's so good to see you, Chris," Sarah said, her voice filled with warmth. "I've missed having you around." I smiled, grateful for her presence and the sense of camaraderie it brought. "I've missed you too, Sarah," I replied, my voice tinged with sincerity. "It's been too long since we've had a chance to catch up." We spent the afternoon together, lost in laughter and conversation, the cares of the world melting away with each passing moment. It felt good to reconnect with an old friend, to feel a sense of belonging in a world that had once felt so cold and unforgiving. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, I felt a sense of contentment settle over me. The scars of betrayal were still there, a constant reminder of the pain I had endured, but they no longer held power over me. I had found peace in the midst of chaos, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I dared to hope for a brighter future. As I bid Sarah farewell and made my way home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the journey I had been on. The road had been long and difficult, filled with twists and turns I never could have anticipated, but it had led me to this moment, to a newfound sense of peace and acceptance. And as I settled into bed that night, the sounds of the city fading into the distance, I closed my eyes with a sense of optimism for the days to come. The scars of betrayal may still linger, but they were a reminder of the strength I had found within myself, the strength to heal, to grow, and to embrace whatever the future held in store. One day, as I walked through the bustling streets of the city, lost in my own thoughts, I spotted her, Karen. She looked different somehow, her face softer, her eyes brighter than I remembered. There was a sense of peace about her, a newfound confidence that hadn't been there before. For a moment, our eyes met, and I felt a surge of conflicting emotions wash over me: anger, sadness, and a flicker of something else, something resembling forgiveness. Despite everything she had put me through, I couldn't deny the fact that a part of me still cared for her, still hoped that she had found happiness in the aftermath of our failed marriage. "Chris," she said softly, her voice tentative as she approached me. "It's been a while." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "Yes, it has," I replied, my voice betraying none of the turmoil raging inside me. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging heavy in the air between us. But then, to my surprise, Karen spoke again, her voice filled with a note of regret. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry, Chris," she said, her words sincere, "for everything. I know I hurt you, and I can never take back what I did. But I want you to know that I've changed, that I'm trying to be a better person." Her words took me by surprise, thawing the icy walls I had built around my heart. Despite the pain of our past, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of compassion for her, a recognition of the fact that we were both flawed and imperfect beings trying to find our way in the world. "I forgive you, Karen," I said finally, surprising even myself with the depth of my sincerity. "Not for your sake, but for mine. It's time to let go of the anger and resentment that have been holding me back, to move forward and embrace the future." Karen's eyes widened in surprise, her lips parting in astonishment. "Thank you, Chris," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful for it nonetheless." With those words, we parted ways, each of us carrying the weight of our past mistakes, but also the hope of a brighter tomorrow. As I walked away, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a realization that despite the pain and heartache of our failed marriage, I was ready to move forward, to leave the shadows of betrayal behind, and embrace whatever the future held in store. Sitting in the quiet solitude of my new apartment, surrounded by the echoes of my past and the promise of a future yet to unfold, I found myself lost in reflection. The journey I had been through, the betrayal, the pain, the eventual healing, played out like a vivid tapestry in my mind, each thread woven with the complexities of human emotion and the resilience of the human spirit. As I looked back on the tumultuous events that had shaped my life, I couldn't help but marvel at the twists and turns of fate that had led me to this moment. The scars of betrayal still lingered, a constant reminder of the pain I had endured, but they no longer held power over me. Instead, they were a testament to the strength I had found within myself, the strength to heal, to grow, and to embrace whatever the future held in store. Lost in thought, I was startled out of my reverie by the sound of a knock on the door. Rising from my chair, I made my way to answer it, curiosity piqued by the unexpected interruption. To my surprise, standing on the other side of the door was Grace, a warm smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Chris," she said, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see how you were doing." I returned her smile, grateful for her unexpected visit. "I'm doing well, Grace," I replied, sincerity ringing in my voice. "Life has its ups and downs, but I'm learning to take it all in stride." Grace nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You've come a long way since we first met," she said, her gaze searching mine. "I'm proud of you, Chris. You've faced adversity with courage and grace, and you've emerged stronger for it." Her words struck a chord deep within me, a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of redemption. "Thank you, Grace," I said, gratitude swelling in my chest. "I couldn't have done it without your support." We stood there in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging heavy in the air between us. But then, with a gentle squeeze of my hand, Grace broke the silence, her voice soft but resolute. "Remember, Chris," she said, her eyes meeting mine with unwavering intensity. "Life has a way of teaching us hard lessons, but it's how we respond to those lessons that defines who we are. You've faced your demons head-on and emerged stronger for it. Don't ever forget that." With those words of wisdom ringing in my ears, I watched as Grace made her way down the hallway and out of sight, leaving me alone with my thoughts once more. And as I settled back into the quiet solitude of my apartment, a sense of peace settled over me, a quiet confidence in the knowledge that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them head-on, armed with the lessons I had learned and the strength I had gained along the way.